hope the grocery store will put those arrows back on the floor so we can all feel safe-ish again. Who doesn't love a good directional arrow? The Kate Dalley Show starts now.
I normally wouldn't make a video like this, but I feel like I need to say something, so I wrote a few things down. I am currently on board the MV Hondias, and what's happening right now is very real for all of us here. We're not just a story. We're not just headlines. We're people.
Okay. Well, sorry. So we're just people. It's not just a story. Yeah, it's not just a story. Okay. Well, what do you say to that? I think whenever I hear something like that, I'm always like, then it is a story. Then what you're saying really is a lie. Because normally when people do a post from a cruise ship, they don't normally say things like that. So it's not something that you would probably start out with. We're not just a story, Kay. It's kind of like saying, this isn't fake, okay? This is real. It's like, if you're going to start out the story like that, it's like, look, I know you're looking at the cookie jar and I did not take a cookie. Even though I was the only one in the house. I didn't do it. That's what that reminded me of. So New York Post had this passenger that was sobbing on the cruise ship for the hantavirus. And I know you guys have been hearing a lot, because I talked about it a little bit last week too. But yeah, whoever said people on cruise ships aren't people, because that's what he kept saying. We're people, we're real. It's like, then you're probably not real. That's usually why somebody would lie like that. It's like, you got to start out with the lie, right? And then I detest irrational manipulation for sure, because this person has kind of an interesting past too. And, kind of worked for, certain causes, and was also a spokesman for, thank you. I appreciate your comments, by the way, on YouTube. A spokesman for COVID. He was also, so hold on just a second. I was just kind of reviewing the whole hantavirus thing and the people on the ship. And of course, you have the people on the ship that were the biologists. And then, of course, you have testimony coming from the ship, but not really from any of the victims. I thought that was a little strange. So there's all kinds of question marks about the hantavirus. There's also the patent that went through in Korea, and that they sat down and in 2024 they had the induction of the whatchamacallit, the vaccine for hantavirus go through. They actually had the patent several years ago. It goes all the way back to 1997, actually, but Korea got underway with their hantavirus shot, and that was a couple of years back. So it's kind of interesting that now we have this issue, this problem with the hantavirus. And so one has to wonder what's going on. So I'd love to get your take on this. I'd love to get some thoughts from you and see what you have to say. Because of course, scam. Yeah, that's coming in. Yeah, scam. And this guy that I'll play this comment again, just because it was pretty funny, actually. Because the way the way it was designed to come across was actually really bizarre. Here's the guy on the cruise ship that works for all kinds of Jewish organizations in Israel, which is really weird. But he was also a COVID spokesman influencer too. Here we go.
Who doesn't love a good directional arrow?
There's a liner.
Kate Dalley Show starts now.
I normally wouldn't make a video like this, but I feel like I need to say something, so I wrote a few things down.
Okay.
I am currently on board the MV Hondias.
Okay.
And what's happening right now is very real for all of us here. We're not just a story.
Okay.
We're not just headlines.
We're not,
We're people.
but he doesn't actually have the Hunta. So you got to love these comments. So the people that are sick aren't actually, you're not seeing any of them. So I posted a picture of the actual hantavirus victims on my Kate Dalley show page, and it shows a bunch of the dummies that you do the you do the training on in the hospital bed. I mean, I just couldn't stop laughing at the fact that they're really trying to sell it hard. So anyway, we'll go back to that, but I can't wait to bring on Morley Robbins. He wrote the book on copper, let me just tell you, and I'm excited to have all of you. And I really want your questions because with everything that's going on right now, and of course, Morley Robbins, I want you to comment on hantavirus, because we started the show with this liner. Let me play it. This liner.
I hope the grocery store will put those arrows back on the floor so we can all feel safe-ish again. Who doesn't love a good directional arrow? That Kate Dalley show.
And who doesn't, right? So I want to get your comments on this hantavirus. How are you, Morley?
Doing great, Kate.
Good.
Glad to be here.
Good. So, comments?
Well, I think in general, we have to step back and recognize that we have a natural mechanism in our body that kills all microbes, whether it's bacteria, fungus, virus, in this case virus, or parasites. And it's a very well-kept secret worldwide, but copper is the recognized original antimicrobe. And so anytime people present with these very unusual viruses or parasitic infections, I know they're copper deficient. I know that their immune system is completely compromised.
At the root.
It doesn't have, exactly, at the root. It doesn't have the firepower that it's supposed to have.
You know, so I've had you on the show a couple of times for copper, and I don't want to keep redoing the same show, but I also want to add in the new things that you've been studying, the new conclusions you've come to, because those that have listened to you through the years have absolutely loved what you've had to say on the show. Because when we get into hidden health secrets and things history hides from us, I think it fascinates people now that we're on these COVID hantavirus trains. And, you know, a year ago, they were trying to sell another one, I can't remember what it was, to us, and people weren't buying it, and they're not buying it now. So I do find that interesting, because even my own kids were like, what's up with this one? And I'm like, go look at the comment boards, because when you see the comment boards, you're going to notice that everyone's like, yeah, BS, this is we're getting sold a box of rocks again, and they're lying again, and it's on a cruise ship, and you can't see the victims because they're all dressed in a suit that looks like it's from outer space, and they're acting like no one has an immune system. And I used to love the memes where the mask was laying on the ground, and and it would say your immune system fell. You know, your immune system's on the ground, pick it up. I used to love those memes because people didn't understand what an immune system was. So let's dial it back. Those that are new to the show, I want you to get a good understanding of what's happened over the last 100 years to our food supply and to all of the minerals, because if you're not taking minerals right now, you're going to be in trouble. So can you kind of dial it back and kind of show the hidden history that happened over the last 100 years?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
The short version, please.
I know. So, there are three fields that have changed dramatically in the last 100 years.
Okay.
The fields of farming, food processing, and pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
And people don't know that those three fields are woven together. They're very, very much interrelated. And so the real change that took place in farming was after the First World War, when they introduced NPK, which was actually a munitions chemical. They said, oh, let's apply it as a fertilizer for the field, allegedly not knowing that it was going to block the uptake of copper in the root system by the plants that were supposed to be using that. The key to copper on the planet is it allows us to regulate iron and oxygen. Oxygen is the second most reactive element on the planet after fluorine gas. So you have fluorine gas, oxygen, and ozone. Those are the three most reactive elements, and they need to be properly regulated and managed. The other is iron is the number one element on planet Earth.
Yeah.
36% of the Earth's composition is iron. It's the master pro-oxidant. That means it likes to create rust, especially in the presence of oxygen. And copper is unique in that it's the only element on the planet that can regulate can regulate oxygen and iron at the same time.
Right.
And not allow the rusting process to take place. So we recognize rust on the outside, rusty nail, rusty pipe, rusty car. But the rusting that you're worried about on the inside, the stone formation, the calcifications, all of that is being laid down in response to a rusting process in your body. And so it started with the First World War. What really changed was in the Second World War in 1941, they started adding iron filings to our food system. Most people don't know that. We're not talking about organic iron. We're talking about literally metal shavings were added to wheat flour in the US, the UK, and Canada.
Okay.
Then in 69, they increased it. They wanted to increase it 300%. They only increased it 50%. And then we have iron fortification programs. We have iron supplements. And now 80 countries around the world are adding iron to their grains. That's a staggering development worldwide.
Yeah, you're right.
And so what we've got is this very confusing concept of increasingly people are told they are anemic, and they're told to be careful of copper because it's toxic.
Okay.
Well, let's go back to 2020. And I knew within the first month of that harangue that something was awry because they were telling people to take high doses of ascorbic acid, high doses of vitamin D, and high doses of zinc. It was called the COVID cocktail. Well, I knew that that was the perfect triad to kill copper metabolism in the human body. Right. So on the heels of that, I renamed what COVID stood for. COV stands for copper's vanished. ID stands for iron's dysregulated. And that's the part that most people don't know about, is that copper regulates iron, always has on planet Earth. And so now we've got all of these different conditions that are playing out. All these chronic diseases now are like hockey sticks. Everyone is just taking off with this unbelievable unchecked elevation in society. And no one's asking, what do they all have in common? Well, they all have lack of energy in common. And there's too much what's called oxidative stress. Well, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
If you can't turn oxygen into water inside our mitochondria, that's what releases the energy into our body. And if you can't make that conversion, then you create exhaust, and it's called oxidative stress. And so when you hear the term, oh, I'm stressed out, well, if you have stress in your world, as most of us do, you're going to have oxidative stress in your body. And so in the last 100 years, it's gotten seriously significant. And let me just give you a very quick example of what's happened.
Please.
One of my colleagues is he likes to take old yearbooks from the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, and find out what they're talking about as it relates to minerals.
Okay.
This one's from 1939, and they're talking about the download of copper from mother to child back in 1939. And all mammals, this is not just humans, but all mammals need to download copper in order to metabolize oxygen and regulate iron. And so back in 1939, the child would get 70 milligrams of copper from mom. And it was recommended that an infant back then could handle 1.5 milligrams of copper a day. So an infant weighs what, 7, 8 pounds, maybe 9 pounds?
Yeah.
And so now let's fast forward in the modern era, what we're told is that the download of copper now is 35 milligrams. So a 50% reduction in copper. And we're told that an adult today only needs 0.9 milligrams of copper a day. When in fact, back in the 30s, when that book was written, it was 4 to 6 milligrams of copper.
Wow.
So what we've done within the root cause protocol is we've really identified the critical relationship between copper, iron, and oxygen is the origin of everyone's malaise and conditions. And it's this lack of energy that's really doing us in. And it's on biblical proportions now. And it's so significant that people don't recognize it.
Right.
Most of all, their doctor, because they don't teach doctors about minerals. It doesn't matter what paradigm, whether it's allopathic, osteopathic, chiropractic, they're not grounded in mineral metabolism and how that is what runs farming, and that's what runs the people who eat the product of farming. And so there's just been this massive decrease in the availability of these regulatory minerals, especially copper, but magnesium is right up there. And there are a handful of others, but those are the big two that we really put primary emphasis on.
And then they also change. So what you were saying is they changed the numbers to make it look as though you're fine. So if you go in and they even do a copper test, which is even, it's illegal now to go into in-depth testing, but just to even do a test, just to get a baseline, they actually changed the numbers from what they were 100 years ago, what we should have in our system, to control the other minerals, to tell the other minerals what to do. And so if you're not only did they lie about the numbers, because they do that with cholesterol, they do that with all kinds of stuff, right? So they lie about it. And then what they do is they tell you you're fine, and they also tell you, oh, it's toxic, and people go off believing that you're toxic if you take too much. So don't hardly take any at all, because you're taking too much no matter what you take. And that's kind of the lie that the medical establishment sells to people, right?
Number one cause of death, heart disease,
right?
Since 1911. And there's a lot of reasons why it began to matriculate in the human population, but it really took off after the Second World War. Wow. After they started adding iron filings. Well, in 1973, a very famous cardiologist and copper researcher named Leslie Clavet, it's a guy, brilliant scientist, he discovered that cholesterol rises when there isn't sufficient copper in the diet. So copper deficiency causes cholesterol to rise. And so why was 1973 important? Because that's when they started the statin mill. That's when they started really working with statins. And for his findings back in 1973, for his findings to become science, one other lab needed to verify that he was right. Since 1973, over 30 labs have confirmed that Dr. Clavet was right. What's the number one selling product on planet Earth? Statins. We live in a very twisted world.
Yeah, we do.
We've been trained like circus bears to believe that cholesterol is a problem, when in fact, what causes all of this heart disease? Excess iron. It's absolutely an iron-driven process that creates chaos, creates rusting in the endothelial cells of our blood vessels, especially the arteries. And it's so well documented, but it's not well taught. That's the problem. The research is absolutely impeccable research, but there's a Chinese wall to get that research into the classroom, and it hasn't made it in yet. And so we're held hostage to this very pedestrian idea that cholesterol causes heart disease, when in fact cholesterol goes all the way back to the beginning of time. Why would our maker and Mother Nature put cholesterol on the planet if it was going to cause heart disease? And all they've done is manipulated the facts to serve their needs.
It really is. It really is amazing when you go back into the history of all of this, because obviously we weren't told any of this. We are stripped of our soil. So like with selenium, I live in Southern Utah. We don't have hardly any selenium in the soil here. We don't have any minerals here. Like it's pretty barren, and a lot of the places across the country. So even when we're growing food, we don't ever deal with the kinds of minerals we should. We don't intake the kinds of minerals we should. And so then we wonder why we have so much disease. And then on top of it, I think you have a vax program. We have a vax program that actually impedes the immune system. And so no wonder we're so ill all the time with all these weird new diseases that cropped up after they took the copper out of our food supply, right? And then the glyphosate kind of eats up the copper.
Now, are you going to share with your audience your budding scientific skills of learning about this whole dynamic going back a century or more?
Well, it's so crazy because Parkinson's and all of these different ataxias, and then of course ALS, all of these things were all coined at the same time, and they were all coined at the same time because it was the late 1800s, and even though people actually really weren't dying of this, they weren't having major symptoms because at the time they didn't even have a case count, right? So what they tried to say was it was underreported, that people had ALS and all these things in the late 1800s, like 1869 in particular. But for some reason, okay, even though you didn't have all of these things cropping up, for all these ataxias, and they all kind of work the same, right? They're kind of similar in what they do to the body, and it's a slow digression of motor skills and everything else. So what they did was Jean-Martin Charcot, right, French neurologist, and neurology wasn't even a thing, suddenly got the money in a department to then start naming illnesses. Well, how do you name an illness that's not even there? And so one of the ataxias, Friedreich's ataxia, was one scientist in Germany that at the same exact time, 1869, 1870, decided that there was this disease, and it was with 9 people in a small little village in Germany. So you really had to know where this little village was. Hardly anybody lived there, but for some reason, 9 people had this debilitating fatal disease, okay, in the family, grandparents, kids, and grandkids. And when you go back and you actually, so he names this ataxia, which is like an ALS, okay? He names this ataxia, and this is part of this neurological new development and department that's going strong and well-funded, but nobody can really figure out why, looking back. And all of a sudden, so these 9 people, and that was it. That was the only 9 people in the whole study. There wasn't anyone else, never anyone else after he named it. He named it after himself, Frederick. And then we're supposed to believe that this ataxia was going on in 1869, 1870. But so it's named after him. What's crazy is there was never any studies about it. There were never any studies performed. He just said these 9 family members had it in their family. So what he tried to say was 2 things. Number 1, it was genetic, and number 2, it was a European disease. You had to be of European descent. Well, ridiculous, because it was just Germany, okay, and it was just the 9 people in Germany. Then you go into the study, and here's the crux of this study, which was the only study he ever did to name an entire disease, okay, that's affecting people now since the 1950s, but not before that, okay? And what he said was, basically these people had it. But when you go into the study, you start peeling back the layers of the study, and here was the problem. One person had one symptom, another person had a completely different system, right? One person has scoliosis, one person has a heart problem, one person has a gait problem, can't walk right. So they said, altogether, this is what this ataxia is. Well, no one had all the symptoms of the ataxia. No one had all those symptoms. So why in the world could you name a disease if one person has this one thing that's not related probably to the others, scoliosis, and one person has a heart problem, the grandpa, and one of the kids has a walking issue? How can that be a disease? Because with the disease, you have to have all of the symptoms. So I was like, this is really weird that no one questioned this and that no one talked about this, and it was just taken like this. And this happened a lot in the late 1800s. So you had neurological departments, just like you had virology crop up in the 1920s and 30s. You had this crop up in the late 1800s, and all of a sudden they had these diseases on the books. But it wasn't underreported, because if you had those symptoms, you would go into the hospital. If you couldn't walk, go into a hospital, you go to a doctor and report it. But they were trying to say it was underreported, but it was there, even though they couldn't name anyone else for these studies. So it wasn't very rampant, because they couldn't even do a study of 100 people. With dementia, they went into an insane asylum in the late 1800s, and they said, oh, we're going to watch these people, these mentally ill people. And they came out and they said, dementia. It was dementia. And then Parkinson's, right? So all these things started then. And then when you realize that, hey, the symptoms of these things, they must have been clairvoyant, because the symptoms of these things didn't really start kicking in until after the 40s, when they were dumping DDT and they were dumping glyphosate, and they had the vaccine program. Now all of a sudden these symptoms start cropping up, but it gave them plausible deniability. I think that's my theory, is to name them in the late 1800s when no one had them, because they were using some arsenic, some different things back in the 1800s, right? And so you would have some symptoms come out of that, but not until all this kicked into gear. So it was really strange to go back and realize there really was no beginning of this, that they tried to make a beginning in the late 1800s of these diseases, but it didn't really fly. And I think that if had they waited until after they introduced their vax program and after they introduced some of these other things, that DDT and so forth, we would probably connect the dots more, but we couldn't connect the dots because everyone goes, it's genetic. Now, I want to ask you about, after that long explanation, I want to ask you about everything being genetic, because when they say genetic, what they're trying to say is, don't study it. You're screwed. You're genetic.
Broken. You're broken.
You're done. Talk to me about genetics when you hear that word.
Absolutely, can't wait. And for the folks who are listening to this, what's so exciting about this discussion, and to hear Kate replay it, when she called me about this, I get really excited about research.
I do.
She was bouncing off the walls. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh, she gets it. She totally gets it.
Yeah.
And so the thing is, now we're supposed to believe it's all genetic.
Yeah.
So let's pull back the curtain. And how do we spell curtain? CU-RTAIN, so we can see the symbol for copper. And what's really important to understand about the whole process of genetics is you have gene function, you have the environment, you have the epigenetic environment that the genes operate in. And then on top of that is the energetics of the body, of the being, of that tissue. And energy trumps everything. If the energy is right, epigenetics is right, and genes are right. But if the energy is off, the epigenetics is going to be off, and that will affect the genes. But they want you to believe that the gene is permanently disabled.
Yeah.
They don't talk to you about repair genes. There are incredible enzymes that repair these genes, whether it's a nick of the gene, a single strand break, a double strand break. There's some very sophisticated changes that happen inside the genes. But the other part that they don't tell you about is that all of these genes need to be read. They get transcribed, but then they get read. And who's doing the reading? Oh yeah, copper. It's a copper dependent process. This whole process of transcribing what is coded within the gene needs to be put through a copper filter. Well, if copper's down, if iron is building inside the nucleus, as it does, and what's supposed to be keeping the iron in check inside the nucleus is a storage protein, which you probably have heard of, ferritin. But ferritin comes in two flavors. There's a heavy chain and a light chain. Well, the heavy chain requires copper, and the ferritin inside our nucleus, inside of our mitochondria, and in certain tissues like our heart and our kidney, it must be the copper-based form. If copper's not there, the iron's not going to get stored properly.
Yeah.
And what Kate is talking about with this Friedreich's ataxia, it's the FRX gene. Ooh, okay. And so what is FRX doing? It's regulating the state of iron inside the mitochondria.
So in Parkinson's and ataxia, the iron doesn't get stored right?
Exactly. It's not being properly recycled. Everything in the body needs to be recycled.
Right.
And one of the main areas of recycling is inside the mitochondria. There's another area is called the lysosome. That's like the stomach of the cell. But the mitochondria is a constant process of recycling things. And iron above everything needs to be recycled so we can get the iron back to the bone marrow to make more blood cells so we can carry more oxygen and keep the ship going forward. And if that iron doesn't get handled properly, it starts to build inside the mitochondria. And that's when that FRX gene starts to fritz out. And when it fritzes out, it does in fact cause that movement or ataxia, the movement disorder. But it's solely from an inability to have adequate copper to regulate the iron to maintain the recycling system. And all of these mechanics are well documented in the research. And what really impressed the heck out of me was how much Kate was able to piece together just from the time that she had taken to try to piece this together from the standpoint of what I never knew about this mysterious naming of all these different conditions in this late 1800s. That was fascinating to learn that.
Well, it was so strange to me going down that rabbit hole, Morley, because when you go down that rabbit hole, you realize that number one, they lied. They had to lie because they didn't have the people for the studies. Just like when they said dementia and all they were doing was just watching mentally ill people. So why were they lying about all of it if there wasn't a concerted plan to basically poison us later on, where these exact symptoms were going to crop up? There had to have been some foreknowing of this. And why would you have to lie about a study? And why would you be able to name a disease after only watching a couple of people? Like, that doesn't, it makes zero sense, because they lied. So if they lied, then that means that there is another answer. That means that it's within the minerals, vitamins, and what's on this earth that could actually help us. So it isn't genetic. It isn't a lost cause. You can fight it.
Well, let's go back 25 years before all this excitement. And we're talking about Louis Pasteur and his nemesis, Antoine Béchamp. So to create the right context, people have heard the name Louis Pasteur. Pasteurization comes from him. But you need to know his education. He got a PhD in a correspondence course in pharmacology, and he was debating with the most decorated scientist in Europe at that time, who had an MD degree, 2 PhDs, and had won more awards for his scientific discovery. And so we've got Antoine Béchamp arguing with the village idiot, and they're talking about the whole process of particle, the pathogen, versus the field, the tissue of the body. And what Pasteur was saying is that we've got to attack the pathogen. And Béchamp was saying, no, you don't understand. It's the field that's off. The energy field of the body is allowing this expression. We need to restore energy, is really what Béchamp was arguing for. And they got completely pushed aside because there was an agenda, as you're noting.
Pasteur was part of that agenda.
Pasteur was part of the moneyed interests were behind Pasteur, behind the village idiot.
Yeah.
And so he's been propped up for a long time as being, this great scientist, when in fact he was just following orders.
Yeah.
And the thing is, then you get into this period that Kate's talking about. It's absolutely fascinating, wanting us to believe in this gene theory.
Yeah.
Well, let me come forward to another lie that took place in the 1960s when the sugar lobby hired scientists from Harvard University to blame fat for heart disease because they knew it was being caused by too much sugar in the diet. And that's only come to light in the last 7 or 8 years. And think about it, for 2 generations, we've been held hostage for fat causing heart disease, when in fact it's an excess of carbohydrates that's causing the problem.
It was that was batting up the 1970s. Now you need to go low fat, right? Because everybody went low fat. It's almost like I told my husband the other day, I go, I want to put up a meme that says, how's that diet soda working for everybody?
Exactly.
Are we thin now? Because we're gobbling it up by the gallons. But it goes to that, right? So it's almost like it was just batting up. It was teeing up this new low fat but high sugar food, which screwed us all.
Well, let me drill in on a study that I just came across a couple weeks ago that I think the listeners will be fascinated by this. Again, we've been trained to believe that genes are fixed in concrete. They're not. One of my mentors was an MD, PhD at NIH, who had a private meeting with Dr. Watson of Watson and Crick fame. Back in the early 80s, that was a big deal. And so Dr. Watson comes into the room and says, so what do you want to know? And my mentor says, well, I really would like to learn more about the immutable, concrete-like nature of genes. So here's Dr. Watson, Nobel laureate. He bursts into belly laughter. He said, oh, Russ, that's for the little people. They're turning off and on all the time. So that's a really important thing to hear from the guy who got the Nobel for discovering the DNA helix. But let's come forward about 20 years, 1996. They were doing a study. They were looking at 5 genes, and they wanted to know, will the gene expression change if we restrict copper from the animal's diet? That's a fair question, because lack of copper in our diet is a stressor. It's one of the greatest stressors on planet Earth. Is if you don't have enough copper, you're going to have problems in your body. That's a guarantee. And so one of the genes they were looking at was this iron storage protein, ferritin. And when copper was taken out of the diet, the ferritin expression increased, which actually makes perfect sense. The body's going to guard that iron because the regulator is missing. The copper is the general, iron is the foot soldier. So if we don't have enough coppers and don't have enough generals, we're going to sequester and we're going to hide that iron from the biology of the body. But another gene I'd never heard of, I mean, there's how many? 20,000 genes, but this one is called Fetuin, Fetuin, and it produces a protein called Fetuin A. And I'd never heard of it. It's involved in the calcification of bone. But what they discovered is that when you withhold copper from the animal's diet, and that would be everyone listening to this show right now, unless you're pounding down the Recuperate or other products like that. But if you're in a copper deficient state, the expression of Fetuin is increasing. So there's an upregulation, is the term that's used. And so there's a 60% increase in Fetuin A. And what they discovered, this is really, I think this is one of the greatest finds I've ever come across. When Fetuin A rises, it inhibits the receptors. They're called tyrosine kinase receptors. And they're the guards that either allow insulin in or prevent insulin from getting in. And they need to be activated. The tyrosine kinase receptors need to be activated in order to allow the insulin in. Well, when Fetuin A is elevated, the receptors don't get activated. The insulin doesn't get in. And what they describe in the article is this is the metabolic origin of diabetes.
Oh, wow.
This is the metabolic origin of glucose intolerance and insulin resistance. And if there's anyone out there who has any kind of sugar issues, you know exactly what we're talking about right now.
Interesting.
And who's talking about copper deficiency being the cause of diabetes? No one except Kate and me. And so people need to understand that there is more to the story, that the phrase that I use, Kate, is we have been misled and we have been misfed. It's very hard for people to accept the fact that they're being lied to, even though that may in fact be true. But there's a misunderstanding out there, and people need to wake up and realize that there is more to the story. And I think it's important that this truther, Kate Dalley, is on top of it. And I was so impressed with her articulation of what happened. It was just like, okay, so there's a shift. There's a shift in consciousness now because of her research, because now I'm on top of that. But the key is we've got to be more vigilant, and we've got to be more proactive in asking questions of our practitioners to say, could there be more to the story? And we've got to demand better answers. Don't accept the pablum that they'll throw at you. We've got to say, do you have research to back up what you're saying? Can you prove to me that what you're telling me is in fact accurate and true and has really stood the test of time? Because there is a lot of manipulation that's taking place out there.
Oh, yeah. And it seems like since the 1850s, and, so much was concentrated in Germany. So much of the vaccine program came out of Germany. So much of
Right.
the IG Farben and
Right.
Gruenthal and all of these different companies came out of Germany. And so it's very, very interesting to kind of go back to that mid 1800 point and then see what they were doing, because it's almost like, we don't go back to the origin of dementia. We don't go back to the origin. Why do we have so much dementia now? And it's affecting almost everybody that's older. It's weird. But we didn't have that in the late 1800s. So something obviously has changed. And so we need to be more curious and examine these things more, and people aren't. And you really woke me up on copper. It was interesting because I never realized, and I wonder if most people listening right now, if you're kind of dizzy from the terminology or everything we've been talking about, copper, like you've said before, correct me if I'm wrong, Morley, is like the orchestra leader of all the minerals. So it tells the other minerals what to do. And so, like, when my daughter was pregnant and she was low on iron, the doctor wanted to write her a script for iron. And I contacted you and I was like, what would you do? And you were like, no, take copper, because copper makes iron, the right kind of iron for her body. It will do it right. She did it. She took a chance. And here she's pregnant, which is kind of a really vulnerable time, right? Like, you're like, oh, who do I listen to? So she did it. A month later, this is how fast it worked. A month later, she goes in and her levels were perfect. And the doctor was like, what did you do? She's like, I took copper. And he's like, oh, copper, like acting like it's kryptonite, and she's like, yeah, and I feel great. And so I find it fascinating that we almost have to take a chance, because the medical cabal is always on one accord. And the only thing they want to write for you is some pharma script. And in this case, it was pharma iron. And honestly, you were like, that's one of the worst things you could do, like have her body make iron. And I applaud you for that, because all of this research has been helping so many people. Copper works really fast, doesn't it?
It can. Very often it does. It doesn't, not 100% of the time, but usually the majority of the time, people find out that once they've introduced that critical mineral,
Right.
the body wakes up and knows exactly what to do. I mean, I got a heart-wrenching call today from a father out in Pennsylvania about his 11-year-old daughter who was told she was anemic, so they were giving her blood transfusions for years.
What?
For 6+ years. Not iron infusions, but blood transfusions.
Oh, no.
And now she's 11 years old. The body has flipped, and now she's presenting with iron toxicity. And he called me up and said, "Can this be fixed?" I said, "Well, of course it can be fixed." But I said, "They've got to get the doctor involved in this part. The doctor who was administering all those blood transfusions needs to understand that they overdid it."
Yeah.
And this idea that she was anemic was a misunderstanding, and a gross misunderstanding, because there isn't sufficient training in these practitioner programs to understand the regulation that copper has, especially over iron in our body.
Wow.
A lot of confusion out there.
How much should somebody take? Now, I went with the formula at formulaiq.com. It's IQ formula. It's amazing. They have two different ones. They have Copper IQ, and then they have Recuperate Copper. And I take Recuperate Copper. And the directions are like, take 2 a day. And so how much should somebody be taking? And then also I'm getting some different questions. Number one, can it clear clogged arteries? Does it help with blood cancers and like leukemias, things like that? What are your thoughts on that too?
So real quick, leukemia, just Google leukemia in quotes, and then after that in quotes, put copper deficiency, and your jaw is going to drop. The leukemias are all copper deficiency syndromes. As it relates to blocked arteries, what happens inside the body, the rusting process that we were chatting about at the beginning, is followed by the laying down of cement.
Okay.
And so there's a close relationship between iron and calcium. What started the process of, quote, heart disease, the hardening of the arteries, the breakdown of the pumping action of the heart, invariably is a buildup of iron. It's not being recycled properly. And when that gets to a point, then the body says, okay, we're going to lay cement down to patch up this mess that's taking place. Can that be reversed? Yes, it can be reversed. And there's celebrated cases of that taking place. The thing is, it's going to take some time though. And so the challenge that people have is they're going to be dancing in two worlds. Very likely they're taking medication from their conventional doctor, and then they're going to put their toe in the natural world. And so that's going to take some delicate maneuvering on their part, because the doctor's not going to embrace an alternative approach. But as it relates to the whole concept of how much copper do we need, I go back to the studies I've seen from the 1930s, where the average American, I can't speak for Europe, here in America, the average American was getting between 4 and 6 milligrams of copper a day. 30 years later, in the 60s, it had dropped to 2 to 5 milligrams of copper. Not a big change, but a notable change.
Lower, half. And
now, 60 years after that, we're told that we can get by on 9/10 of 1 milligram, which is absolutely insufficient. And so when we inspired the design of Recuperate, the capsules have a guarantee of 2 milligrams of copper bisglycinate, along with the spirulina and the desiccated beef liver and the turmeric. And then it's really important that people know that if the starting point that Kate's talking about, it's a great starting point. 2 capsules a day. That way you're getting 4 milligrams. And take them with a meal, morning and evening. And I encourage people to experiment, to be thoughtful. But the thing is, I'm a guide. I know people like to think of me as a guru, but I'm just a guide.
Well, you kind of are a guru in copper. Who else am I going to interview on copper?
I know. But the thing is, I want the baton of guruship to be the individual, and I want them to really be more curious. And say, I wonder how my body would respond if I took 3 capsules. What happens if I took 4 capsules? And I encourage people to work with that.
Right.
And I will. The most I've ever recommended was 5 capsules. That's 10 milligrams of copper, and that's below the NIH upper tolerable limit. Do I have clients that have exceeded that? You better believe I do.
Yeah.
They tell me about it. I don't get in the middle of it. I've had one client who was a type 1 diabetic who didn't have any insulin, took 15 capsules and was fine for 3 days on that until the shipment of insulin came. So that tells you a little bit about the role that copper plays in sugar metabolism. But the thing is, I don't condone that, but I really encourage people to be much more aware of how important copper is in their diet, get at least 4 milligrams, and experiment and see how you respond to more than 4 milligrams, up to the limit of 10 milligrams. I think we've been grossly underfunded with copper. There's a famous article by the same Leslie Clavet from 2022, and he talks about chronic copper deficiency. It's an amazing article. I'm sure I've sent it to you in the past, but I'll send you another copy of it because you can put it in the show notes. People's jaw will drop when they realize the breadth and depth of copper deficiency and the impact it's having on heart disease, cancer, diabetes, neurodegeneration. All the big subjects we've been talking about are all manifestations of a breakdown of energy production in specific tissue around the body due to a lack of copper in the mitochondria.
So here's another thing that I when I came across this, I was actually shocked, was they don't really have any studies. The government isn't doing studies tremendously with any kind of missing mineral and disease. You don't see copper testing for Parkinson's. You don't see copper testing. Like, they are not doing it. And I was actually not shocked because I know how much they lie in the medical cabal. So I was like, that makes sense to me. But again, jaw drop, because I couldn't believe they were getting away with that. When you look at these minerals, and you think, well, what mineral is missing? Because I'm sure now you see any disease, you're like, well, what's missing? What is it, a parasite? And obviously it isn't what they tell us, so it has to be something else. And we have all these missing minerals. The other thing I wanted you to comment on too was that it's now illegal in how many countries to do in-depth copper testing?
There's what are there 180 countries, 200 countries on the planet? I know of 5 where you can do proper copper testing, and
Wow,
United
that should
States.
say volumes to people.
Yeah, United States is not one of them, and so last summer we were on a trip to England and France, and we were coming back by way of Iceland. We had like 26 hours in Iceland. I was so excited because Iceland is one of those countries that allows
No way.
proper testing. Yeah. So
Okay.
I mean, as soon as we landed, I made a beeline to the hospital. Well, actually, it was the following morning, overnight, and so I was there at 7:30 in the morning, and the lab tech was like, "Oh," and she wanted to know why I was there, and I told her, and she said, "Okay, that's great. You know, we'll be able to do that for you." I mean, my heart's like, boom, boom.
Yeah.
I can't believe this is going to happen. And so then it was finally my turn to get up to the
Right,
desk,
right.
and she said, "So where's your order?" I said, "What?"
You need an order?
She said, "You need to have an order from an Icelandic speaking doctor in order to have the test done." I'm like, "No."
Oh my gosh, I wouldn't have even thought of that. I thought you could
I suddenly felt like Lucy, pouring the ball away from Charlie Brown, who wants to kick it desperately. And so I couldn't have it done. But the thing is, this is the most basic test to tell us, is copper doing its job inside our body? And
Yeah.
it is, and it's been suppressed worldwide. And it's like, okay, we could change the world with that one test. I mean, that's how confident I am, how important it is. And so it's out of sight, out of mind. Doctors are not taught about minerals in general, very little knowledge about, other than you need more iron. They have very little knowledge about magnesium deficiency or
Yeah,
selenium deficiency or
yeah.
copper deficiency. And so we go to these professionals. They have hearts of gold, minds that are just incredible what they're able to remember, but they don't have a basic working knowledge of how the body works at a mineral foundation level.
Yeah.
And that's a really, I don't say that to be critical, it's a fact. And
It
so
is
people need to understand that, to use an analogy that I think people can relate to,
Mhm.
I think that copper in our diet and what it does inside our body is like sunshine. And if I had another hour, I'd explain why. But just on face value, it is like the sunshine inside our body. Copper
Mhm.
has a magnetic attraction to sunlight, which is really, really important to know. But the analogy I would introduce is that doctors are like farmers who don't believe in sunshine, who don't believe in photosynthesis.
That's great. I love that explanation, by the way.
And so it's just like, we've got to understand that there is a blind spot in their training. These are incredibly talented people that have been very carefully trained, but
Yeah.
they miss the underpinning of how enzyme transactions take place in our body because they're not taught about the minerals, and especially about, I think the most important enzyme transaction is turning oxygen, which is really reactive,
Mhm.
into water so we can release energy so we can deal with the stress in our lives. And when we can't deal with the stress in our lives,
Mhm.
our body turns, this is a really, really amazing thing. Our body turns the glucose that's in our diet
Mhm.
into fructose. And so Kate's worrying about these sugar-free drinks.
Yeah.
Well, the thing that we should all be really worried about is the fructose that they're putting into our diet. And why should we be worried about that? Because fructose turns into a sugar alcohol called sorbitol. And
Mhm.
what does sorbitol do? It chelates copper out of the body.
Oh my
And
gosh. So your soda is taking your copper out just as much as glyphosate is.
absolutely. And it's just, we live in a very, very challenging world. And so we have this farming community relying on glyphosate, which is chelating copper at an outrageous rate. And we've got food processing where they're stripping the minerals out, but they're adding in fructose everywhere. They're adding iron in everywhere.
Yep.
And it's like, people need to take more time to see, what are you actually eating? Do you recognize the ingredients? And if it doesn't read like a recipe, you shouldn't be eating it.
Yeah.
And the words should not be complicated words. They should be really simple and basic. And so I think we've got to come up this learning curve to know what we're eating and to recognize this basic process that the body engages in response to stress. It's a really profound dynamic that it's buried in the literature. And I just happened upon it initially a couple of years ago, but I came back to it again just in the last month. And it's like, I completely forgot about the fructose. And it's like, it's such a manifestation of chronic stress and the way our body works in response to that stress.
It's so true. If you want to get copper, by the way, you can take the one I've been taking since 2021, and it is at formulaiq.com. Formulaiq.com, and you get the Recuperate Copper. That's one I take. And then also Morley's book is Cure, C-U-R-E, like the elements, Cure the Fatigue, and you can grab that book. And it's crazy because I'm getting calls and messages about diabetes, and you mentioned glucose, and so there's more questions. And so it is odd that everything that the medical cabal does is to address the symptoms. So insulin, it addresses the symptoms, the immediate symptoms of diabetes, and never goes after the root. Chemo kills all your good stuff, never goes after the root of the cancer, really, and what caused it, right? And so it's kind of interesting that everything that they position themselves in is basically about the symptoms. So people are asking on here, what do you do if you just went in and they're saying you're pre-diabetic? What would you do, Morley? I'm not saying give medical advice. You know that. I'm just saying, what's your opinion?
Just some basic facts. People should know what their blood sugar level is. They should know what their insulin level is, and they should know what their hemoglobin A1C is. Those are three basic numbers that I'm sure anyone who has any sugar issues is aware of that. What you need to know about the blood sugar is when blood sugar rises above 120 grams per milliliter, I think is the designation.
Above 120.
At that level of sugar is not your friend. It tastes great going down, right?
Yeah.
But it's a very toxic element inside the body. But when sugar gets above 120, it blows up the copper protein called ceruloplasmin. And then when that protein blows up, and it will blow up, the copper becomes unbound from that protein. It's going to be bound up with something else. But the key is, what's the medication that's used in diabetes? The most prevalent is metformin. Guess what metformin is? It's a copper chelator. And so here we have this medication that's gobbling up the blown up copper, when in fact it's the lack of bioavailable copper that's creating the problem in the very beginning. And so what I think people need to do is they need to be really vigilant about, what is your iron status? When was the last time you donated iron? Are you on top of the different iron markers, and are they within range? But do you have any idea what your copper status is? Have you ever had your copper level tested? Have you ever had the protein ceruloplasmin? There's a mouthful. It's a very important protein in our body that no one knows about. But that ratio of copper to ceruloplasmin is really, really key. And when the copper starts to rise, and the ratio gets above 3.33, you're going to have blood sugar issues. It's axiomatic. It's just the way the body's wired. And so I think you have to be mindful of your intake, not just of sugar. You got to be mindful of your intake of saturated fat. And I'm a huge Weston A. Pricer, ancestral diet. I know how important saturated fat is.
Butter is good, right?
But you've got to be able to metabolize that saturated fat. Because if you don't metabolize that saturated fat, guess who takes it on the chin? That phenytoin gene again. It starts to upregulate, and you're going to have more issues with getting glucose and getting insulin into the cell to metabolize it. And so the issue is, you've got to have a really clean diet. Exercise is going to be very important. You don't have to run marathons. Just movement in general is going to be very important, especially after you eat. A wonderful way to lower your blood sugar is to is walk for like 30 minutes after you have a meal. And it'll drop the blood sugar, and then you're not going to have the problem with the copper and the ceruloplasmin. And then I think you have to really take stock of the medications that you might be on. And is there opportunity for working with your doctor to begin to ease you off of some of that medication? I have a world-renowned scientist who invited me into his home with one express purpose. He was a diabetic, and he said, I wanted to know why am I here? I mean, it's a very impressive guy. He said, I want you to cure me of diabetes. Now, while I will not take credit, what I can tell you is that he now has his blood sugar is profoundly different than it used to be. He's off most of his medications. He takes between 6 and 8 recuperate a day, and he feels great. He's my age. He said, I haven't felt like this in years. And the thing is, he said, the most terrifying part about diabetes is you feel like you have no control over your body. He said, Morley, you've given me control over my body. He said, I still have a blood sugar issue. He said, but I have such vitality now that I haven't had for most of my adult life. So it's a very correctable condition that doesn't require massive medication. It requires an understanding of how blood sugar gets cleared. It requires understanding the minerals, and it requires really being thoughtful about your diet and being mindful of the need for the exercise to lower the blood sugar in the body.
And the test that they do is just not, they do like a baseline test, or what is the test we have in America? Because you can get a test, right, for copper, but it's not the in-depth stuff.
So the test we can get for copper, there's 2 basic tests. There's serum copper, the copper that would be within the fluid that the red blood cells swim in. It's called serum. And then there's a test for the protein itself called ceruloplasmin. And so in the same way that there's a difference between height and IQ, there's a difference between ceruloplasmin and its enzyme expression called ferroxidase. So, Kate, how tall are you?
I'm 5'6".
Okay. Well, I'm 6 feet. So that means that I'm smarter than you, right? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Height has nothing to do with IQ. And so the test that we use in medicine to measure ceruloplasmin is measuring our height. But what we need to understand is the intelligence of that protein and its enzyme expression. And that is the test that's prohibited pretty much worldwide, except in five countries.
And why would people do that if they weren't trying to hide something?
Well, you know, the glib response would be, there's no money in a healthy human.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and you've seen the cartoon of the professor in medical school saying, you know, a customer healed is a customer lost.
Yes.
And so, you know, and that's supposed to be the first day of medical school. I mean, we can have fun with that. I don't know what the driver is behind it. I mean, we can point fingers all day long. At the end of the day, we as individuals need to take responsibility. And we need to become the guru of our body and understand, if we have these symptoms, what can we do? And I think the book that you've referenced, Kate, Cure Your Fatigue, is a great, it's a great primer. The front half explains what's the problem. The back half explains how do we solve it. And it's a very prescriptive program that people all over the world are using now with a lot of success. And in fact, I should tell you some of the success real quick. We have 362 formal case studies. 38% have a complete elimination of their symptoms. 38%. 55% have had significant improvement. And 7%, it's either no change or it got worse. So what I'd like to see is that same profile of the drugs that people are using for their heart disease, their kidney disease, their diabetes. That's a 93% success rate using minerals and vitamins and common sense. And so I just think it's a chance for people to take stock of the fact that their body is not broken. It is out of balance.
Mhm.
And just do the basics to really understand how to bring the body back into balance.
Can you go for a few more minutes?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
So oddly enough, when I looked up, because you have to ask the question in order to actually get a good answer. And when I was looking into Parkinson's and the ataxias and ALS and all these things that came out at the same time, even dementia, um, what was interesting about it was if I asked about, it never would mention copper, but if I asked about what the copper deficiencies are, okay,
Right.
and what those
Yeah.
symptoms look like, the symptoms lined up completely. It was word for word. I mean, I was shocked. I was a jaw drop because I was like, wait a minute. So if I don't have copper in my diet and I'm not taking copper and I'm not doing, so these symptoms are the exact same symptoms of these things that they were naming 150 years ago. Okay. So very, very weird. So thinking about that and then thinking about our history with copper, we used to drink through copper pipes. We used to have a lot of copper, right? Copper dishes. So people are asking on, LB and Angel are asking on YouTube about copper pans and copper water bottles and all those things. What is your take on that?
They've been used for millennia in certain societies.
Okay.
And copper vessels in India was the way they would sanitize their water. The copper pans of our ancestors are very different than the nickel-lined copper pans today. You don't want nickel getting in your food. Trust me on that.
Yeah.
And so the caution is you're not going to get physiological doses of copper using a copper vessel. They're great. They're wonderful. They're wonderful antibiotics or microbial settings for water and foods and things like that. But we're at a point now in society where we have been deprived of these basic minerals because of changes in the farming and the food processing. And so we need to go back to the basics. And it isn't that the copper vessels, they're not going to do any harm, but they're not going to shift the frame of reference in the body. They're not going to make the material difference that's absolutely needed. And what's interesting is, to your point about AI, I've got some different definitions of what AI stands for. AI is always incomplete.
Yes.
It's always the iceberg. You're at the tip of the iceberg, and there's this huge mass that they're not telling you about. But it will always lead with iron. It will always defend iron.
Yeah, you're right.
And so a couple months ago, I was doing some research with a colleague of mine, and we were looking at the mechanism of iron overload and what it does to the body and the impact that it has. And there was a 10-step response to the question. But I knew from my prior research that copper was going to be intimately involved in many of those 10 steps. And so I got the answer back. We were using perplexity. And I said, what about copper? Where's copper fit into this paradigm? And this is the response, and I quote, "Oh, you know about copper. Oh, here's what I know about copper." And the answer changed completely based upon introducing copper into the equation. So what we've developed within the root cause protocol is an RCP constitution. And basically what it does is if you're going to work with AI to do any kind of research, you need that constitution, because what it's telling AI is, look, we know how important copper is to human physiology. Here's where it's essential. So when you do your search, build that into the focal point of your research so we get back a complete answer. And it's completely changed our research when we do that.
Because most people don't have the reference of copper to even ask the question. So you'll never get a full answer is what you're saying. And that's what happened to me when I was like, well, wait, what happens if you don't have any copper? the exact same things that happen in these diseases that cropped up and right after they took it out of our food supply and our soils and all of those rich things that we used to eat. And so it really is amazing when you go back, because talk about well-laid plans. I mean, that's how I think Satan's really, really good at forecasting the future.
Just doing his job, he's just following words. No, but it happened to me this morning. We were looking. I'm actually writing a book on the myth of copper toxicity to get people to realize there's more to the story.
Yeah.
And so, what's the one thing that we never talk about with copper toxicity? No one ever talks about biofunction. When in fact we're perfectly designed as a species to get rid of excess copper through our biofunction. And so I thought, oh, well, this will be an easy AI query. What are the 10 things that cause a breakdown in biofunction? AI, always iron, and it was all the answers that came back. They all came back insane responses, and I went, "What about copper?" And the response was, "Oh yeah, well, the whole biosynthesis of bile requires copper." Well, why didn't we lead with that? Why wasn't that the very first thing it said is, you can't have good bile function to get rid of the excess copper that people are all worried about if you don't have copper. And so here's the twist. This is the most amazing thing.
Okay.
The book is The Myth of Copper Toxicity. Guess what causes the perception of copper toxicity?
What?
The lack of copper in your diet.
Stop it. Are you serious? That's what they're
Absolutely.
toxicity. You don't have it?
Yeah, absolutely true, because the lack of copper in the diet leads to iron overload. Iron overload is creating the symptoms of copper toxicity, and no one's talking about biofunction.
Amazing. Amazing. And I was going to ask you too. That's amazing, actually, Morley. I was going to ask you, so with the right minerals, right? You have the right load of minerals at the right ratios in your body. And that includes copper at the helm, right? Because it's going to tell the cell what to do with iron. It's going to tell the cell what to do with all these other minerals. Okay.
Absolutely.
Keep everything regulated. So that also controls the parasites, right? So if you have, there's some good parasites, I think, right? And then there's pretty nasty parasites, and parasites could be the cause of some disease. So those get out of control if your minerals are off, right? And then disease in general would get out of control, like leukemia, like you said. So you have different, like what, blood cancer, like all these different cancers too, that could get out of control if the minerals aren't balanced, right? So the root cause of cancer, what would you say? Root cause of cancer.
So there was a time when copper was not on the planet because oxygen was not on the planet. And so, we can debate that. How do they know that? There's some really smart people out there. We can have a debate about what is time, how long is the year, things like that. But the fact of the matter is, according to these astrobiologists, there was a time that preceded oxygen. Okay. And when oxygen came on the scene, it changed the world, changed our physiology, and it required copper. Copper became essential in our physiology.
Okay.
Cancer, and as I've studied it, a wonderful book. If people are at all readers, there's an amazing book about Otto Warburg. It's called Ravenous. It's the most amazing book about a world-renowned scientist, and his passion and study was around cancer. He was fascinated by it. But I think that, to me, what cancer represents is pre-copper, pre-ceruloplasmin physiology. And so what cancer really represents is it's an anaerobic, without oxygen form of metabolism. It's very inefficient. It's very iron-centric. Got to have a lot of iron in order to do that. And what does that iron attract? Parasites. All cancers have parasites. What do parasites like to do? They like to gobble up retinol. It's amazing. They have this. Everyone's been told that they have a ravenous diet of sugar. Well, what they also like is retinol. And you go back into the annals of time, 1920s, series of studies done back in the 20s, 25, 26, 27, where it was recognized that retinol deficiency causes cancer. And there's a very specific mechanism in the mitochondria where it happens. And it's only now being re-identified. A century later, people begin to realize that the real breakthrough therapy for cancer is iron chelation, get rid of the excess iron, and retinol therapy. Infuse more retinol into the body. So
Because
it
when I
knows what
think
to
of
do.
retinol, I think face, because you think face creams.
Right. It's way more than face. I mean,
Yeah.
so um, what happened, again, back to that study at Harvard, where they were blaming fat for heart disease, what they were really trying to do is take retinol out of our diet. And that's exactly what happened. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, the American diet had sweeping changes in it. And there's a famous picture of Time magazine where you've got the bacon and eggs, but the bacon is a frown. And they're trying to get rid of all forms of fat. And when you take fat out, you're taking retinol out. Well, why is retinol so important? It's what allows copper to be so important and usable in our body. If we don't have retinol, we can't load the copper enzymes, and they can't function without copper. And so
How do you get the retinol?
you get it through beef liver.
Uh-huh.
You get it through grass-fed butter that you were talking about. You get it through yard eggs. Get it through grass-fed heavy cream. And what would be the other? Those are some of your biggest forms of retinol in the diet. Oh, and cod liver oil is probably the most effective. And so the company that sells the Recuperate also sells.
Yes, I have it. I actually gave it to my son. I gave him a bottle of the cod liver because the cod liver is so important that there's a reason we used to take it all the time. There was a reason. And when we stopped doing that, man, we got very unhealthy, right? And so you're saying, look, you have these this proper nutrition. And when I meant good parasite, I just meant parasite that isn't as nasty as the ones causing brain.
Right. I'm trying to think of a friendly parasite. I'm not sure there is something.
I'm not sure either, but I mean, ones that aren't as nasty, I don't know, but they should all go. But it's amazing how your body feeds off of these. We're just missing all the master nutrients, and no wonder we're diseased. 1 in 2 gets cancer in their lifetime now. We have all these problems with all these chronic conditions, autoimmune, chronic fatigue. That happened after the vax program. We have like all of these like crazy things that happened after they started industrializing the food, taking out the natural fertilizers, putting in their chemical fertilizers, ruining the soil, and then making our food for us, and then taking out minerals and then adding stuff that would actually annihilate the minerals, right? Am I getting that right?
No, you've got it down 100%. And the program started with Pasteur. Attack the guest, ignore the host. And what Deschamps was saying is we've got to focus on the host. We've got to strengthen the host, strengthen the individual with their diet, with their stress management, with their exercise. And that got pushed aside back in the 1850s. And the electron microscopes came out and said, let's focus on the pathogens, the bacteria, the fungus, the virus, the parasites. And we've been trained to believe in disease when in fact it doesn't exist. The symptoms are real. I'm not denying that.
Yeah.
But stress is what causes mineral loss and mineral dysregulation. And when you have mineral dysregulation, you're going to have metabolic dysfunction. You're going to lose energy production. And once you lose energy production, you will get symptoms. The symptoms are very real. The terminology, the diabetes, the cancer, the whatever the word is that's used, that is a narrative. The underlying problem is all stress-induced metabolic dysfunction, and we can correct that. That's all very correctable.
It's kind of like the word COVID, because the word COVID was just attached to a set of every single symptom, right, that used to cause what we call the flu. So it's all, and right now, Hunta, because it's all the same symptoms. They just repackage it in different names. It's kind of like where you're going with that.
Exactly. No, and it's just getting people to realize they're just moving our cheese again. That's all. Okay. And the thing is, the most important phrase I've ever read comes by way of William Shakespeare. All the world's a stage, and we are merely players.
Yeah.
And so there is a play, and there is a playwright, and there's two sides to that playwright. But the thing is, why are we here? We're here to learn our lessons,
Yeah.
and we're in the midst of a play, and we, at some level, we can't take this too seriously, because I think there's an operating system that we have no control over, but the operating system exists to create stress so we can learn our lessons.
Yes.
And the lesson that we're trying to teach people within the root cause protocol is you can deal with your stress. You can let go of the fear that's attached to that stress. But more importantly, you can take the right food, right focus of minerals and vitamins, and you can metabolize that stress, and you can go about learning your lessons. Because it's very hard to stay connected to your source if you're worrying about diabetes or cancer.
I was just going to say that. That's so funny that you said that. I was just going to say that. We're too preoccupied with all of our stuff that's going wrong with us, because they said after 40 and 50, you fall apart, which is true, because of the lack of minerals. Your body is sick of trying to shore you up when it can't do it anymore, based on all the crap we eat and the million bags of Doritos and the diet soda, and the body's just like giving up, and so we accept the fact that we just fall apart. We don't even try to really
Go to a coffee shop or a restaurant and listen to what people talk about. They talk about their health all day long.
Yes.
We've been conditioned to worry about our health, worry about doctor's visits. I sit in Starbucks and I have for 17 years in the morning to do my research. I'm shocked at what people talk about. They're not talking about world events or their latest discovery or what they've accomplished. They're worrying about their lumbago. It's like, oh my gosh, there's probably more to your life than that.
We call it the organ recital, because you get up and you it's a recital all about your organs that are failing or what is going on, because that is exactly what we do. And after the age of 50, when I get together with friends, what are we talking about? Ailments, like things that are going wrong, trying to find answers for it.
But there's a reason why, and there's a formula that iron biologists use worldwide. People like Gutteridge and Hallowell, Robert Crichton, these are really big names in the iron world. We accumulate 1 milligram of iron every day we're on planet Earth. So get out your calculator, put in your age. I'm 73 times 365, and it's 26,000 milligrams of iron in my body. Right. I look very different today than I did when I was 23. And what's causing that is iron accumulation. Even with all that I know, it still accumulates in our body. And that's why we put so much emphasis on doing blood donations to help lower that iron footprint in our body and allow the iron levels to go down, because they do accumulate as we age. And the whole aging process is iron accumulation and lack of bioavailable copper. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. And the world of aging is beginning to wake up to this, that they're recognizing the inherent properties of iron to cause the rusting, the oxidative stress, the loss of energy production, and all these different conditions that we just think are a part of aging. Well, they're a part of the mismanagement of iron, because there isn't adequate
Copper's job, again, is to regulate the iron, right, in the cell. So it wouldn't be building up if we had the right amount of copper, right?
No. And the thing is, men are designed for 5,000 milligrams of iron. So I've got 26,000. Women are designed for 4,000. Well, you can do the math on your side, Kate. And I'm sure you've got a multiple of 3 or 4 times the 4,000. And that's when the symptoms start to kick in your 50s. There's a threshold of iron that's accumulating, and no one's talking about it. It's the most amazing discovery, is to realize, wow, the whole world is suffering from this, and no one's talking. There's a lot of research being done. It's not being openly presented to the public. So
the homework, honestly, the homework for everybody should be whatever you're dealing with, because I assure you, you're dealing with something. I don't care what it is. You're dealing with something right now. If you're listening to this show, I doubt any of you are perfectly healthy right now because of what's in our system and what's being dropped on us and the toxins in our food and all the chemicals we digest. I promise you, not everything's okay. So if you took what's wrong with you and you actually introduced the word copper into that, right? You'd probably be amazed at what came up, because you have to ask the right question actually to get the right answer. And we don't ask the right question. We leave that completely out. I can't even tell you how many doctors I've talked to that are going to medical school, they're graduated, and I mention the word copper and they know zero. That is the scare. That should scare everybody listening to the show right now. They know zero about it.
And the important thing to build on what you just suggested, Kate, when you do your Google searches, and we know you're going to do it based on this conversation, take whatever symptom you're most worried about, put it in quotations, and then put the phrase copper deficiency in quotations.
That's
You'll be
important.
surprised.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised at what comes back. But there's three levels of copper deficiency. The base level is copper deficiency. Then there's copper depletion. Copper depletion would be next. And then there's copper deprivation. We're not allowing any copper into this organism. And you're going to get back three completely different responses based upon what word follows the word copper. So deficiency, depletion, deprivation. And the thing that should unsettle you just a little bit and build on Kate's, rattling of the drum here is there's a lot of research around those copper conditions. Why would they be doing that? Why would they be doing all that research and not use it to instruct doctors about it? And doctors don't know about copper. They don't know about minerals in general. They have a very, I tease them, their degree stands for mineral denialist, but they have a very limited understanding. And you can't fault them for it because it wasn't part of their formal education.
No, but that was by design.
Right, that's by design. Where I thump them in the nose is, you could be a little more curious because your patients aren't getting better. You're using the playbook that you learned in school, but they're not getting better. Well, there must be more to the story. And that's where I really encourage people to be proactive and do your own research, and not to be a rectal irritant, but just to wake them up to say, wait a minute, there's information here that you may not have known about. And they need to incorporate that into what they do know. And so it's just a very important process. We need to be partners in this healing process. And I quite frankly think we need to be in charge. And the doctor is really they're a consultant to our process.
So true. Our country doctors used to know all about these things until they eradicated them and told them that they had to go into the Johns Hopkins medical cabal training schools in the 1930s, and they basically became a pharmapad writer.
Exactly.
And a rememberer of whatever they wanted to teach them. So it wasn't about teaching curiosity. And like Brian Artis says, Dr. Artis is always like, there's probably like 500 or 600 doctors that are even worth their salt, like even understand the body in this country.
I think it's true. He would be one of them. But the question that's not being asked, if someone's told, oh, your iron is low, you're anemic, or, oh, you have vitamin D deficiency, or, oh, you have diabetes. The question that needs to be asked across the board, why? Why do I have that? Why is my vitamin D low? Why is my iron low, doctor? Explain that to me. And that's where the whole system breaks down, because they don't know why. We know why within the root cause protocol, and that's why the book would be of value. But I think that question needs to be asked, and just sit quietly and wait for an answer. Don't take the dismissive, well, I don't know about that. No, say, I really want to understand what your understanding is of the problem. Why is my blood sugar at 140? What's causing that? And just
you're right.
Really allow them to sit with that, because maybe that will spur them to be more curious, so that when the next patient asks that question, they'll be able to answer it.
You're so right on that. In fact, it's interesting to me when doctors, there's one more little example, then we'll go. There's one more little example, and that is doctors will tell you, it's almost like they're speaking from a script. The polio vaccine saved people from polio,
Right.
but they never ask, why did polio go through the roof?
Exactly.
And that was DDT poisoning, because when they stopped spraying after Congress questioned them in 1952, 3 years later, the polio thing came out. Polio started giving people those symptoms of polio. Like Morley says, this is like names of things they're giving people for symptoms. But it's so fascinating that I've never once ever heard a doctor question why polio went through the roof. They don't question. If they question that, they would go down a rabbit hole they couldn't get out of. That's the problem. So what do? They just cite what they're told. The remembering part of being a doctor is, well, that saves lives. It's like, well, why, how, and why? Like what you said, ask the damn question.
Just be more curious, and just really, and it's not to be disruptive. It's just to really understand what is their knowledge and what is their working understanding of the problem. That's really what we need to get to.
I like being disruptive, though. What did you call it? A rectal disruptor?
Rectal irritant. I knew. I'm sure that'll come back to haunt me. I'm sure.
I love you, Morley. You're fantastic. So the book is Curing Fatigue, and this is by Morley Robbins. The product that I take, and that's because I didn't find you. Actually, my stepdaughter found you through a book, the book that you wrote, Curing Fatigue, and then said, you need to have this guy on your show. And that was years ago. And so then I was like, okay, well, if I want to take copper and I want to get into balance so that I'm not getting all these things, what would I do? And you were like, Recuperate Copper would be the best choice. It has beef liver and it has all those things in it that you were just talking about as well. And so I've been taking that and I love it. And let me just tell you, you can go to formulaiq.com, use the code word Kate, you get a little discount, but you can order that. And that's the one I trust. It's the one I take. So I'm just sharing with you guys. You can do what you want, but that's the one I take because I know that they have really solid ingredients that actually absorb in the body and you can feel the difference. So formulaiq.com and it's code word Kate. I really appreciate you, Morley. Thanks for sharing your wisdom.
I'm happy to do it. And just real quick, anyone who has long COVID needs to recuperate. They need more copper in their body. That's what's causing the symptoms of long COVID.
The immune system is having your issues. It's trying to tell you your immune system's down, right? It's kind of like, what doctor did I have on? And he was talking about sugar. And he said, every time we digest sugar, you're knocking out like a whole fourth to a third of your immune system from working. So he's like, we kind of think, you don't really think in those terms. And sometimes we need to think in those terms, right? Like, especially with like copper and things like that. Your immune system's struggling, right? So
absolutely struggling.
Give it some food. Yeah. Copper is what it needs. Thank you so much, Morley. Really appreciate you.
Really enjoyed it.
And of course, I'll be back tomorrow. Melissa's out tomorrow, but I'll be back tomorrow. And of course, KateDalleyRadio.com, and then share this with people please. Let's get everybody healthy so we have to stop worrying about it every day. And then also, be faithful, be fearless. Find out why I say that. Go to KateDalleyRadio.com. Thanks, you guys. Hold on.